Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Local Government Tele-Institute on Redistricting, Statewide and National Trends for County Board Resizing. Today is the second of an 8-part series that we're offering. You'll notice that today's agenda, and I should formally introduce myself. My name is Amanda Cole, and I'm an Extension Educator of Community Development for Unit 18, serving Christian, Jersey, Macoupin, and Montgomery counties in central Illinois. Today's facilitator and presenter on Illinois demographics is going to be Rhonda Hardy, and she is an Extension Educator also in Community Development based in Cook County. And our presenter that will be discussing redistricting and statewide and national trends for county board resizing is Dr. Kent Redfield, and he joins us from the University of Illinois in Springfield, and I know that Rhonda will provide a more formal introduction to him later this afternoon. If you have questions about upcoming tele-institutes, I am the person to contact, and my information is provided here on the screen as well as a handout that each of you should have. If you have questions in regards to the Certified County Officials Program, referred to as the CCO program, please contact Annette Cole. She's an administrative aide based at the West Central Regional Office in Springfield, Illinois, and both her phone number, fax, and her email are provided. And she can provide you information about registering for the program or checking on your status as far as bronze hours, silver level hours, or gold hours. Tips for effective telecommuting. We wanted to remind everyone today, and I think you guys have done a great job of pushing #5 to mute your phone, and that's also the best way to unmute your phone during today's program. We will have a Q&A session after the presenters are done, but feel free throughout today's program if you have a question that you don't want to forget and you need to ask it the right moment to put it in the chat box, which is in the lower left-hand corner of your slides. And if you do ask a question and don't type it in, remember to push #5 to remute your phone. And we also ask that you state your name and the county or location that you're calling in from so we kind of get an understanding of where the question is coming from. I want to remind everyone to please fax back or mail back in today's sign-in sheet and your evaluation form. Those notes need to be turned into Annette Cole, and also you need to check the box next to your name if you are enrolled in the CCO program or interested in enrolling in it, and you need to get credit hours for today's session. Upcoming tele-institutes, the next one is going to be on Thursday, November 17th. It's a legislative update, and we hope that you guys can join us back at that date and time. The fourth one is on December 15th. It's GIS for local government. And then in 2012, the 4-part series that will begin in 2012 will start on January 19th for intergovernmental agreements, February 16th, the importance of broadband, March 15th, special structure assessments, and April 19th, setting and permitting wind farms in Illinois. So we hope that many of you will be able to join us back at one or all of those upcoming sessions. And now it is my pleasure to formally introduce Rhonda Hardy. As I stated earlier, she is an Extension Educator based in Cook County in Community Development. She has over 30 years' experience working and volunteering in communities, the business industry, and in educational institutions. She has both an MS and BS degrees from Southern Illinois University School of Environmental Design and recently became certified in Sustainable Environmental Management from the University of California, Berkeley. And she has received 64 hours of credit in economic development through the International Economic Development Council and is certified in volunteer management through the Points of Light Foundation. And you can see a more formal bio on the screen as well as in your slides, and her contact information is there if any of you would like to follow up with her today. And now I will turn it over to Rhonda.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. This is the first time that I've done this, so I'm really excited about it. And so, again, I thank you for tuning in. I believe that you'll have an interesting session this afternoon. The overview of the workshop today, we are going to be talking about the redistricting. As you know, there has been controversy across the state. There's some legal aspects that's taking place right now that's based on the redistricting, and I am sure that our second presenter, Dr. Redfield, will, maybe address those particular issues and concerns. What we decided to do also is to give you, first of all, an overview of the census, the 22 census, because that is key to the redistricting, the population. Going to do it a little bit differently. Not going to have a PowerPoint presentation per se. Hopefully everyone received the handouts. In those handouts, there's pictures of two maps and also some fact sheets that that you can follow along with me as we go into details about each of the maps. Decided not to do a PowerPoint, but instead to go exactly online to our census site for a couple of reasons, to help you maybe become more comfortable with the census site. So if we're ready, I think we're going to go on and do that. I hope you have your notes and maps in front of you. And so I believe all I need to do is to click share.
Yes, that is correct.
And let's see here. There you go. Do you guys see the 2010 census data?
It's still loading out in the field.
Okay. We practiced this yesterday, and it went pretty good, so I hope it's okay today.
Just asked a question out in the field. Can one of our counties report in or type in if they're seeing the U.S. Census website on their screen?
We don't have anything in Bermain County yet. It's just a blank screen.
Okay.
Amanda, is it usually going to take a while for it to come up?
No, let's wait another second or two, and then if not, we may have to go back to the PowerPoints.
Okay.
Yep, Rhonda, this is Tom.
Yes.
Did you share your desktop or did you share something else?
I shared the desktop. What I'm going to do is go back. It says, please choose a screen sharing option, and I have desktop here. And then I'm going to hit share again.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. There we go. Now we're seeing something.
Website.
What do you see?
I see.
Your meeting login. Right there's where you need to click. There you go.
Click the site. How about this?
Yep.
Yes, now we can see it, Rhonda. We're good to go.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Good. Okay. Well, let's get started. Using this map, hey, you have a couple of pictures of maps, but I decided it would be kind of fun to go online and actually use the maps that's in the census, our census report. Just a quick reference. The reference for that is, I have it in my notes somewhere, it is 2010.census.gov. So after the presentation today, you might want to go back online and play around with it a little bit yourself. The reason that we are going online is because the maps are interactive, and we'll just go around and look at it a little bit. But before I get started with looking at our maps, I wanted to just give a brief overview of the importance of the census. And I've just been learning about it quite a bit in the last couple of years, and the bottom line conclusion is that the census are used an excellent tool for decision making. A lot of times people, you get the news blurbs on the 10 o'clock news about the census said this and that. So our general population may have a general idea of what happened with that 2010 census that took place last year. But I really believe that it's very important for those leaders who do have to make a decision. Those leaders could be business owners. They could run a not-for-profit organization. It could be our elected officials, just anyone who wants to have some data to back or affirm or make decisions, new decisions, on how to serve their populations. In general, if you have your sheet, I have the first one. The first fact sheet is importance of the census. In general, there are basically, and I'm just generalizing here, there's basically two processes for the census. You have your decennial census, which comes out every 10 years. That's the one that everyone was encouraged to fill out. The last 2010 census was the shortest census form that they've ever had. The purpose was to encourage everyone to get involved, put that information, and boom, we would have some basic information there. This one provided a basic population count per state, and it also includes some basic information about race. Now, the second type of, procedure you would talk about is the American Community Survey. Some of you may be lucky, I say, to be asked to participate in this survey, and this is a rolling survey. And this is the survey where they go into details and ask more specific questions about how long you've been in your home. Do you own your home? Are you a renter? Just a lot of specifics. And then it also gets more detailed information, not just by the state or county, but it also goes all the way down to the census tract. And usually this survey, they survey a sample of about 3 million people across the country. Now, the importance of the census. This is it's a law that we have a census, and that's the first census was in 1790. There's several basic uses for the census. Is to allocate our federal money, and sometimes that federal money is then brought down to the state level to be allocated. But it does things with the numbers. They can find out how much each state should receive as far as education, health, and other federally mandated services. Also, the population numbers determines the congressional apportionment. And this is really the main purpose of our presentation today. I'll go into a little bit of detail about that, and then also Dr. Redfield will give you great details on that apportionment. Other things that the census is used for is local planning and analysis. I mentioned that business leaders, community organizations. It also determines emerging needs like new infrastructure, highways. If there's a higher concentration of people or a higher concentration of businesses in a particular geographic area that they found out through some of the census, that means that there might need to be money allocated for new infrastructure like highways. Other things with the planning, regional planners definitely use our census. They also take those censuses and massage it a little bit to get more numbers out of it. Community and economic development planning as well is another reason that census is so important. Redistricting, local voting districts, and that's like more locally when we're talking about the states. Then the census, again, I want to stress it is an excellent decision-making tool. Now, let's look at the map. I'm going to scroll down, and the map is everyone seeing things okay? I hope so. I'm going to scroll down to, let's see here. I want to scroll down to up here. I think this is the one. I'm going to do a full view, and what I want to do is apologize. I'm going to go back to the United States map before we look at Illinois. So that's the map handout that you should have. Then, looking at our numbers and population, we have over 308 million people in the United States, and this represents a 9.7% increase for a 10-year period. The increase is great. However, it wasn't as great as 2000, where we had a 13.2% in population. So it's almost a 5% decrease in our population per se, comparing it to year 2000. If you're looking at your map, with the little key at the top here, lost, and then it goes to the dark blue. According to the map here, you can see there's basically two states that had a decrease in population. That's Michigan, and also Puerto Rico, though it's not a state, it is counted in our demographics and our population, also had a decrease or a loss. This is probably, there's always a lot of reasons why there's decreases and increases. People shifting, retiring, moving to other parts of the country. For Michigan, there's probably several reasons why there is a decrease, maybe a decrease in available jobs that may lead people to move to other states or other locations. Now, also, if we want to look at a winner on this map, that would be Nevada. They had the greatest increase of population at 35.1%. Then if we go to the other states here, you can see that Illinois, we only had a 0 to 5% increase. Then you have the other increases as well. Texas had an increase. Then if you're looking at the southern parts, there's increases in those states. Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina experienced a greater increase in population. And then also what I call like the Rocky Western states had great increases. Idaho, Utah, Colorado, Nevada, and then Arizona had increases greater than the norm. Now, on the other side of what you see on the screen, we could look at our population by race. And if you guys take a look at your next fact sheet, it says United States population by race. We'll briefly take a look at that. Overall, there was there's a smaller increase for the Caucasian white population of 5.7%. When you look at all the increases in the other ethnic or racial groups. But even then, the white population represents 72.4% of the American population. African American population alone represents 12.6%. There was an increase overall across the country in that racial group. I'm looking at the other categories that we have here: American Indian, Asian, Native, Hawaiian, other races alone. But if we look at American Indian, Asian, and Native Hawaiian, it looks like it's really good increases, 43% for Asian alone, 35 point. However, if you add those three racial groups together, it still adds up to about 6% representing the whole country. So even though that increase looks high, their numbers are still low as far as what they represent for the whole. I think in 2000 there was a lot of discussion about how to separate the groups. So there was a lot of discussions. So they had to include some other categories because our Americans wanted to be recognized in various ways. So they added some other race alone, two or more races as an additional category. They did that in the 2000 census. When we look down below, we are also pulling out the Hispanic population. That is an emerging population and is affecting and will affect many things now and for the future. If we look at the Hispanic population alone, it represents 16.3% of our population. In 2000, African American population representation was higher. So you see now the Hispanic population is actually higher than the African American population. They had a significant increase, 43.0%. And as we move along, this population then can affect everything from housing, from how voting trends are going to take place as well. Now I'm going to then shift specifically to Illinois. All right. For Illinois, we had a 3.3% increase in population. We did not increase as much as we did in 2000, so we lost some population. Even though we had an increase, the increase was not as significant as it was in the year 2000. Now, if we then look at the counties, you'll see that losses occurred over the majority of the counties, but there are some counties that did gain quite a bit. If I start up at the north, this represents Cook County. We had a small change in population. No, actually, I'm sorry. There was a loss because it's the color that's here. Lost population. But in Cook County's collar counties, up here, Lake County, McHenry, Kane, DeKalb, Kendall, Will, as well as Grundy, they had a significant increase of population. And I believe that significant increase also represents a higher concentration of Hispanic population moving into those areas. Even though Cook County lost, all of the collar counties gained. Now, if we take a look again at parts of the other of the state in other areas, right in here, the central part of Illinois, there were some increases. Champaign County, McLean County, Woodford, and then Tazewell. They had a pretty good 5 to 15% increase, and then some other counties around there also had an increase. Interesting, down below, if you look at the southern part, Monroe County had an increase of 15 to 25%. I don't know why. Maybe someone from Monroe County could tell you a story, because there is always a story behind the shift in increases or decreases of population. If we take a look then at Illinois population by race, and that's on this side of the screen, we'll see that there was an increase in white alone population, a small, very small increase, 0.6%. African American decrease by the same amount, like minus 0.6%. So that is basically one of the only populations where there was a decrease, except for here if you look at Native Hawaiian and other islanders alone. The other racial categories also did have an increase, but if you look at their total representative numbers, that's only still about 5% of the total population. African American population represents 14.5%. If we go down, then again, I want to point out the Hispanic population. Significant increase in population or change, 32.5% change from 2000 to 2010, representing 15.8% of our state's population. So they are second, white alone, Hispanic, and then African American. Now, let's go on then. I'm going to take us to take a look at an important map. So I'm going to scroll down here. This is what you see on the screen now is the apportionment data, which is our focus for today's workshop. And I'm going to do a full screen on that. Great. I'm going to start off here looking at the population change before I go to the apportionment, because I thought it was some interesting things if we look at this part first before we go on to the apportionment. Apportionment is the number of representative seats that are available in the United States. And those 435 seats are divided between our 50 states. When you look at the population, it has steadily increased, which is really interesting. If you look down here between 1910 and 1960, except for 1940, there was a smaller increase that might have something to do with that was after the Depression time, so maybe that, and possibly that's what affected the 1940s. But then after that, you see a really great double-digit increases, which is also the time during the baby boomer section. So that's why those numbers are so high, especially for 1960. We moved up steadily with a decrease in 1990. We had a great increase in the year 2000, but then again, there was a decrease in the total population, a decrease in the increase of total population to 9.7% according to our 2010 census. I pointed this out before in one of the first map that we looked at, where particular regions had a greater increase than other regions. The South and the West had a greater increase, whereas we look at the Midwest, 3.9%, not as great, and also the Northeast had the least amount of decrease in population. And all of this really can affect a lot of different things as far as the resources that are going to be available in those areas of the country. If we take a look then at the legend, again, we saw that Michigan lost population. We sort of looked at this map before. Now let's go on to the apportionment map. And I believe that is the map that you guys have it as part of the handouts. Give you a chance to look at that a little bit. There's a couple of things we can talk about. So I'm going to start at the upper left-hand corner and talk about the apportionment in 2010 based on the 2010 census. What this is saying is that there's 435 seats, and if you divide that by the population, that means that each seat has approximately 710,000 people represented in each representative seat. So that's where you get that number here. If we go down below, this is very interesting because this shows how some seats were, total seats reassigned per decade. In 2010, we have 12 seats reassigned, same that we had in 2000. In 1990, we had quite a few seats reassigned. Now, if we take a look at the map over to your right, this map here, this is really telling as far as how the seats, the shift in the number of seats has been made. We can say that there was winners and there was losers. the two areas that lost the most, and they are the ones in the dark orange. Ohio lost 2 seats. That means they have now 16 representatives instead of the 18. And then also, if we look at New York, they lost 2 seats. Now they have representatives. They will have 27 representatives. The other losers then are in the light orange color or the goldish color. Altogether there's 10 states that lost. So that's the dark orange as well as the light orange. 10 states lost. Illinois was one that has lost 1 seat, and definitely we'll talk about that. Missouri, Iowa, and then down Louisiana, all of the light oranges then lost 1 seat. Now, if we look at the winners as opposed to the losers, interesting, Texas gained the most seats. They gained 4 seats. They now have 36 representatives for their state based on the population count. Florida gained also with +2 seats. Again, some of those western states, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, gained 1 state, and then also Washington, D.C. gained 1 seat as well. Well, I'm going to end the presentation. I hope that this was helpful to give you just a general overview as far as what has gone on with our census and how it's going to affect the voting and affect the resources that are going to be available for each state. And with that, what I'd like to do, I'm going to just do a couple of things here. I think Amanda did that for me already. Yeah. We can open it up for a few questions. Did you guys see any questions? I don't see any questions on our board. I'm going to move down a little bit more. I see quite a few people. I see there were some people that were having trouble with viewing the screen, but I hope it worked out okay for everyone. I would like to introduce our main speaker. Dr. Kent Redfield. Dr. Kent Redfield is a professor emeritus of political studies at the University of Illinois in Springfield. He has research appointments with the Center for State Policy and Leadership at UIS and the University of Illinois Institute of Government and Public Affairs. Prior to joining UIS in 1979, Dr. Redfield worked for 4 years as a member of the Research Appropriations staff for the Speaker of the Illinois General Assembly. While at UIS, he was director of the Illinois Legislative Staff Internship for 20 years. Dr. Redfield's research and teaching interests are primarily in the areas of Illinois politics and the role of money in politics. I first became familiar with Dr. Redfield. He gave a presentation. There was a training here in Chicago called Journalist Redistricting Training, and he presented. And this program was sponsored by the McCormick Foundation, and so he was one of the presenters. This happened early in March. He was one of the presenters for that workshop. So we're really happy to have Dr. Redfield come and present. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. I'm certainly happy to be here, and I have a PowerPoint presentation. We're going to run through a number of items and then look at some examples. And I'm going to touch on a wide variety of topics, and I'd be happy to go back into anything and when we get to questions. So we're going to just start with a basic overview. As Ron has already pointed out, one of the critical things we need to keep in mind is the difference between reapportionment and redistricting. And so the fact that Illinois lost a congressional seat in after the 2010 census is the result of reapportionment. How we drew the new set of district lines for congressmen, which are now being litigated in the courts, is the process of redistricting, which Illinois did under the process that exists and the criteria that exists within the state of Illinois. But as we're going to see, there's a wide variation in terms of how states go about fulfilling their federal constitutional duty in terms of redistricting, and then how they go about fulfilling their duties under their state constitution, both in terms of legislative bodies and governors working on state legislative maps, and then local governments. It's important to remember that redistricting really comes out of first principles in terms of American government and the idea of representative democracy. The idea of representation was certainly key to the Founding Fathers. That was really the driving force between trying to figure out a system of government that worked, that provided for representation. But it is also clear in terms of the history and the execution of the U.S. Constitution that another overriding principle is one of equity, of trying to provide fairness and equal treatment under the law in terms of all of the things that we do in the name of government, and so those are the two kind of guiding principles in terms of thinking about redistricting. Certainly this, as Rhonda has pointed out, this has the roots in the apportionment clause of the U.S. Constitution. We didn't always have 435 members of Congress. That those numbers have shifted over time. It is now fixed in statute, and if you've got if you're going to provide representation with changing population and have a limited number of representatives, then you're going to get the reapportionment that we have just gone through. It is clearly, when you look at redistricting, there's a difference between the period prior to 1963 and the period after that. Prior to 1963, the federal courts were very reluctant to get into questions of equity and fairness as it related to the drawing of legislative districts, any kind of representative districts. The courts viewed that as the political thicket. These were that they just didn't want to get involved with. These were political decisions that were not subject to judicial review, and that changed dramatically with a series of cases under the Warren Court, starting with Baker versus Carr in 1962, which essentially established the principle that redistricting does raise judicial issues under the federal Constitution, and this is where we get the establishment of one man, one vote as a principle under the Equal Protection Clause and extended to the states through the 14th Amendment. So in a series of decisions, the Westbury versus Sanders applied principles of one man, one vote to congressional redistricting. Reynolds versus Sims applied it to state legislatures, and Avery versus Midland County applied it to local governments. This was a series of cases from 63 through 68. And prior to that time, we had states that apportioned, say, a state senate by a state house by population, and a state senate by giving every county a state senator. When the court overturned those kinds of redistricting schemes, contending that if you had senators chosen from two districts of unequal population, then that meant that the votes of individual citizens had an unequal value. If 100,000 people get to choose a state senator, and in another district 200,000 people are choosing a state senator, then the court's logic was that in the first district your vote is only your vote is worth twice as much as the senator, the voter in the second district, and so they were very rigorous, and that's been applied in. It's very much settled law at this point. Everett Dirksen from Illinois fought against those decisions, introduced a constitutional amendment that he was still championing to the end of his legislative career that would allow a state to apportion one of its legislative chambers on a basis other than population. And the logic was that if you look at the federal Constitution, every state has two U.S. senators. That's on the basis of every state gets two, as opposed to the U.S. Congress, where it's done on the basis of population. And the court's logic essentially is that this is a federal system. States had standing prior to the forming of the U.S. Constitution, that in fact, and therefore they have standing within the federal system that is very different than the standing of a county or a group of counties. And so unless we're going to amend the federal Constitution in some way, the current court is going to continuously affirm the one man, one vote, and it really doesn't come up anymore in terms of grounds in which to try to craft a legislative or a representative map. And it's important in terms of the Avery decision to understand that this applies to all units of local government, in addition to states and what we normally think of as legislatures. Anytime you've got representation on the basis of population, where you've taken the population within a governmental body and divided it into districts on the basis of population, that those districts have to be drawn in accordance with current constitutional guidelines, and there also will be state and federal standards that will apply. So that's kind of where we are at the moment, historically. Now, one of the, there are consequences to what we did prior to 1963. Part of the reapportionment revolution, the one man, one vote, had to do with excesses with discrimination on the basis of race. That, in fact, states and local governments were using redistricting to in fact dilute minority representation. but there are other consequences of what was going on. A lot of the failure to redraw maps at the state legislative level after about 1930 were based much more on region than any other reason. State legislatures were dominated by rural interests. You had the shifting of populations after starting in the 30s to urban areas, which grew tremendously, and part of the failure to redraw, to reapportion, or to redistrict, depending on the way the state was set things up, was in fact preserving the dominance of rural interests in state legislatures. By the time there's a certain irony in this, by the time we got to the reapportionment revolution in 1963, power had shifted really away from urban areas into the suburbs. And so if we would have had one man, one vote in effect in 1900, you would have had a period where urban areas would have dominated legislatures, and instead we kind of skipped that and went from legislatures dominated by rural areas to legislatures dominated by suburban areas. So there certainly were consequences. Some of them had to do with racial discrimination, but some of them also had to do with region, with the dominance of one region over another. What we have here then is kind of the current federal constitutional framework. So if you are redrawing representative districts in a civic center authority, in a city, in a county, or the state legislature, or for the U.S. Congress, then you have to comply with the criteria that currently exists through the existing set of Supreme Court decisions. One man, one vote, equal protection under the U.S. Constitution is, we've talked about that. So that is a primary criteria. Now, it will vary from state to state, whether that means just as close as you can get it, or often when we look at local government units, the variance can be up to 10%. But it is, that's the cornerstone. But we added another element to that in 1965 through the adoption of the Voting Rights Act. And there are provisions within the Voting Rights Act which protect minority voting rights and address patterns of, historical patterns of discrimination in terms of the way that boundaries have to be drawn. And so whenever you go through a court case involving the validity of a redistricting, you're going to look at population. In Illinois, the last two times the Democrats have drawn maps, they have tried to vary legislative districts by one or two votes per legislative district. It's they have just tried to take that off the table. But people will raise issues in relation to whether or not you are diluting minority voting rights. But there are limitations on that. And so in a series of decisions in the 90s, the court said you really can't use race as the primary criteria, or what appears to be the sole criteria for drawing a legislative district. And so in a case coming out of North Carolina where you essentially strung together a series of communities and areas that were heavily African American that stretched along an interstate in order to make up a congressional district, the court in fact threw that out. And so you can't use race affirmatively as the sole criteria, and nor can you use race as nor can you draw districts in ways that dilute minority voting rights. Now that we're going to see in Illinois how this idea of addressing historic patterns of discrimination plays out when you get to an actual case. The federal Constitution does not mention districts being contiguous, although that certainly is applied. Compactness is in terms of both visually and through measures of geographic dispersion. How does a district hang together? Geographic boundaries and political boundaries are exactly what they sound like. Communities of interest is a little broader criteria, and the courts have recognized these as criteria as in terms of applying federal standards, but they don't have the primacy of one man, one vote or voting rights. Individual state constitutions can be much more specific in terms of how they the kind of criteria that they impose on their legislatures for drawing both state and local state and congressional and state legislative districts, and also through statute how they apply those criteria to units of local government. The area that is still ambiguous is the question of political outcomes. A political gerrymander, and gerrymander is the general phrase used to talk about using redistricting in a way that provides some kind of unfair advantage. Either you're promoting a party or you're promoting protecting incumbents, or you are using the way you draw lines to dilute minority voting streak. The question is the political outcome, the political unfairness of a map, is that something that that you can raise as a federal constitutional issue? And the court has kind of given a mixed answer in terms of this. The court has accepted cases where this criteria has been alleged, but you have not got anywhere close to 5 justices agreeing on just exactly what it would mean to have a map that was so politically unfair that it would raise a federal constitutional issue. The maps in Illinois that are currently in front of the federal courts, both the state legislative map and the congressional map, in both cases, the plaintiffs that are challenged in the maps have raised the issue of political fairness, that they go too far in terms of protecting or promoting the interests of Democrats to the disadvantage of Republicans. It is unlikely that the Roberts Court, the current Supreme Court, is going to open up this area. This court generally defers to legislatures rather than breaking new ground. And if you were to accept the case in Illinois and overturn the maps on the basis of that their political unfairness, that would open up virtually every state and congressional map in the country. And so while the map in Illinois certainly favors the Democrats, the maps drawn in Texas favor the Republicans. And so, the question is, would the federal courts want to take on deciding the facts within, 30 or 100 cases, probably not 100, but certainly you can imagine the numbers getting into the 30 or 40 cases of either legislative or congressional maps, state legislative or congressional maps, of being challenged in federal courts, and the courts having to adopt standards and guidelines and applying those to a particular fact situation. So it's not likely that the grounds that the state Illinois' maps are being challenged, that particular ground will be upheld. It's more likely that the courts will act in relation. If they act, it's more likely that it will be on the basis of minority voting rights rather than the question of political outcomes. That doesn't mean that the political outcomes are not important. It doesn't mean that this isn't something that a different court in a different era might look upon as something that does raise a federal issue. But right now, it's probably a dead end as far as the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court is concerned. Now, when you get to the state level, then states draw the maps for congressional districts. States draw the map for state legislative districts, and they, we'll talk about local government in a minute, but you're going to have a multitude of criteria and processes. Some states use bipartisan or nonpartisan commissions to draw maps. Some states involve the judicial branch. Some states leave it up to the legislature and the governor. Some states have, like Illinois, have a political process that's then followed by a redistricting commission if, in fact, you don't get a resolution. And so the process varies widely from state to state, as does the criteria. Illinois is a very simple criteria: compact, contiguous, and substantially equal population. The Texas Constitution is very specific about a presumption to favor maps that don't cut up counties, political subdivisions. There are other states that talk about communities of interest and apply criteria. Leave those. Set them out as criteria under which one might bring a case in state court. So what happens when you get congressional maps or state legislative maps get drawn, then they may be challenged in both state or federal courts. The state in Illinois, the state courts have not generally gotten into wholesale rejections or redoing of state maps for the state legislature. They have, in fact, sometimes just made minor changes in maps. But if you would not be in state court for a congressional map, that just involves federal issues. But a state map could end up in both state court or in the federal courts. And when you talk about the process, then it is someone is given the authority to make the decision, and then it gets reviewed by the judiciary. I mean, that is. We always litigate maps in the current era of redistricting. So, just to use as an example, Illinois, to talk about how you might work this through, Illinois has a process that involves congressional and legislative maps being essentially subject to the legislative process. On congressional maps, there's no other alternative and there's no deadline. So if what happens this time, the legislature passed a map as a statute and the governor signed that map, the congressional map, then that is what's being challenged. And if it is not overturned by the federal courts, the State Board of Elections will accept petitions and conduct elections, and those will be administered by the counties on the basis of that map that was passed by the legislature. There is nothing in the Illinois Constitution about the criteria that should be used. We're subject to federal statute and federal constitutional criteria, but beyond that, the state constitution is silent about the process of drawing congressional maps, and often we have not drawn congressional maps. There have been competing maps have gotten out. The legislature has been split between Democrats and Republicans, and usually it's the Northern District Court in Illinois becomes the map maker in terms of adopting and perhaps modifying a map that's suggested by contending parties. It was unusual 10 years ago to get a map that was actually signed by the governor in terms of the congressional map. It happened again this time. It happened 4 years ago because it was a deal between Democrats and Republicans to throw one representative overboard, one congressman overboard when we lost a seat, and then essentially draw maps that protected all of the remaining 10 Republicans and 9 Democrats. When you get to the state, in terms of the state legislature, there is a process that says it's the legislative process subject to signature of the governor until you get to July 1st. If you go past July 1st, which almost always been the case in Illinois, then you get to a redistricting commission that's appointed with equal number of Democrats and Republicans by the state legislature. If they don't reach a decision, a 9th member is appointed between a Democrat and a Republican. Those names are put forward by the state Supreme Court, and a name is drawn out of the hat. We avoided drawing a name out of the hat the first time around for the map that we used in 1973 after the 72 after the 1970 Constitution. This provision was put in so that we would always get a compromise. We'd never risk a decade worth of maps by drawing a name out of a hat. It worked once, and then up until this year, we thought it was kind of normal to draw a name out of a hat to see who won the redistricting lottery, the Democrats or the Republicans. This time around, with the Democratic majority and in the House and the Senate, Democratic governor, then you got a bill passed by the legislature that was signed by the governor. The criteria, again, is compact, contiguous, substantially equal in population. There was a statute passed, a law passed, with some additional criteria which primarily codified what the federal criteria currently is in terms of communities of interest, in terms of protecting minority rights, in terms of the process. We got maps that were drawn by the legislature, signed by the governor. Among many wrinkles, one of the interesting wrinkles of the Illinois process for the state is that the governor plays a role until you get to July 1st. His signature is necessary. Once you get past July 1st, then either a majority of the commission, 5 votes, or when you get 9 members, then 5 votes with the tiebreaker, gets you a map, and the governor plays absolutely no role in the process. So that's the way Illinois does it. There are almost as many variations on this as there are states. Okay, let's shift to redistricting at the local level, at the local government level. Okay, you have, in addition to the federal criteria which apply, you cannot violate federal law in terms of drawing new boundaries for a county, a municipality, a civic center authority if people are not elected at large. State constitutions may have specific criteria Illinois does not, in terms of how you go about setting up the process of drawing representative districts. Most of the time, this is controlled by state statute, because most of the time you're in a non-home rule state where units of local government are creatures of the state. They cannot do things other than they have no powers other than what is authorized by the state constitution or by statute, or can be applied by statute. Now, Illinois has a very strong grant of home rule power that allows home rule municipalities and home rule counties, of which there is one, Cook County, wide discretion in terms of adopting processes and procedures and ordinances and local statutes that are maybe in direct variance with state law, unless the state either exercises concurrent jurisdiction or preempts the local government from acting. And so you may get situations in which you can read the Illinois Municipal Code, but there may be some wrinkles that a city council has applied because of their home rule powers. If you elect people at large, you have at-large elections to select all the members of a legislative body. Anytime you've got at-large elections where you've got, all the everybody in all the county commissioners run countywide, all the city aldermen run countywide, then you don't need any kind of redistricting. Redistricting has to do with how you divide up if you elect the members of a governing body from representative districts, if they are representing people, then you have to apply redistricting. You don't do redistricting if you have a situation where it's essentially, there's an election, but it really doesn't involve representation. The best example I can give you here is Illinois judicial districts. We elect judges to the state Supreme Court, but those are not elections for representation. And so we have divided the state into a number of judicial districts. And the second judicial district, which is essentially the collar counties around Cook County, elects the judge to the state Supreme Court. The fifth judicial district, was essentially Illinois south of Springfield, elects a member to the state Supreme Court. There are twice as many voters in the second judicial district as there are in the fifth judicial district. And so if we apply the one man, one vote logic, you would say, well, my vote, the vote of the people in the fifth judicial district is worth twice that of the people in the second judicial district. But that only applies if, in fact, you are electing people in a representative function. And what we have, by what the determination has been is that in case of judicial elections, it's, you're selecting people, that are from essentially a residency district. It doesn't raise issues of one man, one vote. You can certainly argue that, from a philosophical standpoint, but that's this current situation in Illinois, and that's the best example I can give you of a situation where population doesn't matter, even though we're electing 7 members to the to the state Supreme Court. It is not 3 at large from Cook County and 4 from downstate. It's not a situation where one man, one vote is operative. In terms of reapportionment, you can get reapportionment at the local level if the number of electoral districts is determined by statute and it is based on population. A municipality of a certain size gets so many, has so many aldermen. Then if your population size changes, you get above or below a threshold, then you could be in a situation where you need to add or subtract an alderman. So you can get reapportionment. But what we're primarily is what's going to be going on in Illinois at the local level is redistricting, where we are, we're redrawing boundaries of electoral districts of a local government unit. Now, we have already skipped the municipal elections in terms of the consolidated election schedule. And that has been litigated. It was not litigated this time around. It was litigated a decade ago. The argument was that because we're holding elections in the spring, we don't have the data, therefore, once every 20 years, you're in a situation where the maps that were drawn in for the elections for 2001 are in effect for 2011, and the maps that will be drawn for municipal elections or that involve representative districts, local government elections involve representative districts for the consolidated election in 2015. Those are going to be drawn between then and now. Those maps will be in place for 4 elections rather than 5, and that's again that's a bowing to reality in terms of when the census data is ready versus what the election schedule looks like in Illinois under consolidated elections. That could change if technology gets better. There's no question about that. You can imagine a situation in which you got the data and it would be practical to redraw them and then allow people to circulate petitions. Or if we move the primary, move the consolidated elections to June or something, then you probably could end up with new maps before you held the elections in the year after the census takes place. Now, what I'm going to talk about next is kind of the politics and the strategy. We're going to illustrate that with some maps, and then I'm going to stop boring you, and we can take some questions and see what specifically you're interested in. There are redistricting goals that are clearly there. Some of them you would value. You would think it might be more noble than others, or have a higher moral standard. But these are all present. One of them is protecting incumbents. Legislatures, county boards, city councils get to draw the maps. And so the people that are incumbents get to participate in the process, particularly in Illinois. And so there is a powerful motivation to protect incumbents. You can use maps to create a partisan advantage. There's no question that the Democrats try to maximize their partisan advantage in the congressional and state legislative map. These two goals can be in conflict. It actually made it easier for the Democrats to draw a map that favored electing Democrats because they lost 4 incumbent congressmen in the 2010 elections. That sounds, like that doesn't make sense. But if Congressman Hare from the 16th district, which we're going to look at in a minute, had won election, then the Democrats would have felt an obligation to try and draw a map that would protect him, that might not have looked like the map that the district they came up with that shifted quite a bit to the north to try and elect a Democrat. You can use them to create regional advantages, and right now we overlap legislative and congressional districts from Chicago into Cook County. We could create the Great Wall of Chicago and keep as many districts as possible solely within the city of Chicago, both in terms of the state legislature and congressional districts. And that would change the dynamic. Right now you've got a lot of legislative and congressional districts in which a significant portion of those districts, but not all of those districts, lie within Cook County. Preserving communities of interest, geographical, political subdivision boundaries. What do you do to cities and counties? City of Springfield, in the congressional map of 10 years ago, was divided in three. The city of Springfield in the latest legislative map is divided into 3 Senate districts. There is one of the issues within the court challenges to the congressional and state maps at the federal level is whether or not the interest of Asians within the city of Chicago is protected in terms of a community of interest, or whether that is more better dressed in terms of protecting the interests of racial, ethnic, cultural minorities. It makes a difference, since Illinois doesn't talk about those things in its state constitution, those issues are less likely to be raised in state courts. And then one can certainly draw maps to promote electoral competition. Most legislative maps are drawn to minimize electoral competition, either at the local, state, and congressional level. What you want to do is create safe districts with overwhelming majorities for your minority opponents if you're in charge of the process. Create districts that favor you, that have, that where you've got a majority, but where it's strong, and you want to minimize things that are just a coin flip. Whereas one could go in and make that the primary criteria, that we're going to draw legislative maps or aldermanic maps or congressional maps so that they would maximize the electoral competition. They would be balanced as much as possible between the two or however many political parties are there. So some of these goals are in conflict. The words you want to keep in mind in terms of strategy are packing, cracking, and tracking in terms of how one might go about this. And we're going to look at some maps and to illustrate this and illustrate these goals, and then then we can see if there are any questions. Packing is concentrating either by race or by political party, concentrating a group together into as much of a majority of whoever you're packing. You want them to have an overwhelming majority. Cracking is the exact opposite. That is taking whatever group of voters that you're focusing on, and fragmenting them, dividing them up into as many districts as possible. Tracking is pulling in a group or drawing a boundary in such a way that it does something as far as someone's residency. I'm going to, because the current maps are in litigation, we don't know what they're going to look like. These are some examples from the maps that we used for the last decade. This
Dr.
is a map.
Redfield?
Yes.
We are requesting about a 5-minute break, if you don't mind, and it looks
sure.
like the rest of your presentation will look at the maps.
Sure.
So we normally, and I didn't let you know this,
I'm sorry.
About a 5-minute break, and then we can come back online. Is that okay?
Oh, sure, of course.
All right, good. I've been writing down questions. I hope everyone else has been jotting down questions as well. All right, Dr. Redfield, you're concluding now with us taking a look at the maps in your presentation, so we're ready.
All right. Okay, great. I apologize for not giving people a break there. We
broke at the right time.
Oh, good. Now
okay.
you have to be careful about giving a professor an open mic here. So, now these are the maps, the congressional maps that were drawn and were 10 years ago, And if you look at the yellow one, which is the 15th district, and you track it all the way down to the very southern part of it, and it goes in from the Mississippi River into Saline County. I think that would be the center of that is probably El Dorado. And what's going on with that particular district is Illinois went from 20 to 19 districts. The Democrats threw Congressman Phelps overboard. They decided to cut him out of the process. He was the newest member of the delegation. And so they put him in a district that is primarily centered in the Champaign-Urbana area, which have been represented for a long time by Congressman Tim Johnson. And so, Congressman Phelps's home was in a district which, went almost all the way up to Kankakee, and he had the option of either running against Representative Johnson, or doing what he did, which is to run in the 19th district, which is the pink district that was represented by Congressman Shimkus. So, they purposely, the people that drew this map, and it was an agreement between the incumbent Democrats and incumbent Republicans, purposely created an electoral disadvantage for Congressman Phelps. It was almost in reverse incumbency. But, that's an example of going out, of stretching a district out to pick up a particular piece of territory. If you look at the blue district, which is the light blue district, which is the 17th, this was drawn for Congressman Lane Evans. And then when he retired, Congressman Hare represented it. And, the geographic kind of population center is up in the Quad Cities. It goes along the Mississippi River, picks up Quincy, comes over, picks up some Democratic counties, Democratic-leaning areas in central Illinois. It runs through the city of Springfield. At one point, it's about a block wide. It picks up the east side of Springfield, and then it picks up a large portion of the city of Decatur. Now, the voters in Springfield and Decatur were that were put into the 17th district were primarily African Americans, but they were not put in there in terms of race. These were areas that voted strongly Democratic, and so that in trying to get a safe district for Lane Evans, they were going out and just picking up areas that were of Democratic strength. There is a possibility that if Congressman Evans would have been an African American, you might have got a challenge to this district because of the fact that you were picking up the areas in Springfield and Decatur that were primarily African American. But this was to pick up Democrats, and it was about incumbent protection. And so everybody, they made a conscious effort to minimize competition and to allow the Republicans and the Democrats to kind of draw their own districts. This is, it's the opposite of introducing competition as a primary criteria. Some of the other districts are certainly a little more compact in terms of the design. Now, to show you an example of tracking again, this is the 4th congressional district within the city of Chicago. And this is represented by Congressman Gutierrez. So the 4th district has 2 large areas of population, and then is essentially connected by the interstate off at one end. This is one of the most strangest looking districts in the country. But this is a district that was drawn to elect a Hispanic representative, and it passes constitutional muster because of the historic pattern of racial discrimination within the city of Chicago. And so, this is a case where under the Voting Rights Act, you can draw maps to address historical discrimination, and that certainly is the case. It's also done in terms of some city districts within the city of Chicago and some other places, but this is the most dramatic example of drawing a district that has a racial outcome, but is done on the basis of trying to address historic patterns of racial discrimination. But just to show you that it's not all about high constitutional principles, if you look at the little pipe that comes into the top of the bottom half of this, that was drawn so that a potential opponent of Congressman Gutierrez would not live in the 4th District, but would in fact live in the district between these two sections, which is the 7th and is represented by Congressman Danny Davis, who's an African American. So I mean, this is another example of when people are able to draw their own maps or they have an overwhelming partisan majority, then it is certainly the potential is there for mischief. And so this fellow's name was Castro, as I believe, and they just that little wrinkle in there is just that it only serves one purpose, and that's to put where he lives outside the district that he wanted to run in. The reason this is necessary, necessary is not the right word. What you're doing is linking two Hispanic communities within Chicago, and they are actually two distinct communities. One is primarily, in terms of the ethnic background, one is primarily Puerto Rican, one's primarily Mexican, and so the only way to get a Hispanic district and still preserve an African American district is you end up with this very strange configuration. Let me give you, and then the next example is how the impact of partisanship on drawing legislative maps. The people in Champaign would recognize this, the 103rd and the 104th Representative District, which make up the 52nd Senatorial District for the state legislature over in Champaign, in the Champaign area, Champaign and Vermilion County. I can take any legislative map, 1970, 1980, 1971, 81, 91, 2001, and 2011, and I can tell you whether it was drawn by Democrats or Republicans solely by looking at the treatment of the cities of Champaign and Urbana. When the Democrats draw the map, they put Champaign and Urbana in the same district, therefore creating a district which leans Democratic and has tended over the last 30 years to 40 years to elect a Democrat. And then the representative district outside of Champaign-Urbana has tended to elect Republicans. When the Republicans draw the map, as they did in, say, 1980, what they do is they split Champaign into they put Champaign into one legislative district, Urbana in another legislative district, join it up with a lot of more rural territory, and you end up with two Republicans being elected from from these two districts. So it's you can argue that Champaign-Urbana is a community of interest that it makes sense for them to have one person representing them rather than to split them into two legislative districts in terms of kind of shared interests, and that's certainly one way to look at it. But the outcome has been primarily partisan. It is. I mean, the determination has been partisan. When the Democrats draw the map, they're in the same district. When the Republicans draw the map, they're in two different districts. So those are examples of how these the different kinds of goals that we talked about get translated into specific instances. The map drawn in 2001 for the state legislature was to create a partisan advantage for the state legislature, whereas the congressional map was drawn to protect incumbents. It does make a difference. The process, the criteria, the people making the decision was, they were drawn by the legislature and signed by the congressional map by the governor. The other one came from Redistricting Commission, but two very different outcomes. So that's kind of in terms of the politics and the basic strategy, that all operates within this process, and it certainly can get translated down to the local level. Are you drawing maps to protect incumbents? Are you drawing maps to create partisan advantage? Are you drawing maps to create regional advantage? Are you fragmenting communities? What are you doing in terms of racial minorities? And what kind of electoral competition? These are all things that go into the mix in terms of deciding, how to draw those lines. It is. I don't know that it's uplifting, but it certainly is a fascinating process to watch every decade. And I've run way too long. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you, Dr. Redfield. That was really, really interesting just to hear the history as well as what things really come into play when making those decisions. I'm going to start off with an initial question that occurred to me, while listening to your presentation, and that is based on your knowledge and experience with this round of redistricting as opposed to in the year 2000. Do you see any distinct differences, concerns, or issues that have arisen in that time period when it comes to like new litigation, what have you?
The criteria in which we're litigating the map are primarily the same. I mean, the ones that will, in fact, determine the outcome, which are going to be questions under the 1965 Voting Rights Act. I think it's highly unlikely the courts are going to entertain the question of the political fairness of these two maps. They certainly reflect the changes in demographics. Not only as downstate has lost population and become more Republican in terms of its voting trends at the local as well as state and national. The city of Chicago lost population as opposed to a decade ago, but is more Democratic than ever. Cook County is more Democratic and gained some population. Then you had the huge explosion of population in the suburbs. And so while the Republicans are probably going to pick up seats downstate in the legislature, the Democrats primarily focused on drawing maps that would allow them to pick up seats in suburban Cook and into the collar counties. And so they focused in terms of trying their electoral advantage in that direction to try, whether they're successful or not, that's why we have elections. But whereas in the congressional map, again, the fact that you didn't have incumbent Democrats who had won narrow races in 2008, you didn't have those to protect because they lost in 2010. You saw a similar strategy politically in terms of trying to craft districts that would allow Democrats to pick up seats while making Republican districts more safe, packing Republican votes into those districts. So the basic kind of criteria in both cases, the maps dumped a lot of combined, created situations where if Republican incumbents are going to run from where their houses currently are, you're going to have Republicans running against Republicans, and that's certainly a political, that was intentional. I mean, so there's no question it's intensely partisan.
I see. Thank you. Does anyone else have questions? I don't see anything typed into the chat board here. No? All right, Dr. Redford, excuse me, do you have any one last comments, and then we can close the evening?
No, this is, in municipalities that have to redistrict, this will be fought out prior to 2015. County boards are going to have to engage in this, are engaging in this, and it's driven by the electoral calendar, so that you have to have things in place in relation to when you have to file for petitions for primaries. When you're electing people on a partisan ballot, then the early primary comes into play. So we will play all of this out at the local level, maybe not as dramatically. Although the county board, the reorganization in DuPage, in Cook, and the city of Chicago will be every bit as dramatic as what the redistricting process will be every bit as intense as it was at the state level.
Okay. Well, we'll have to stay tuned, listen to the news, and read the newspapers and what have you to find out what the results are going to be on that. One last request: are there any questions before we end?
Rhonda?
Yes.
Rhonda, can you hear me? This is Terry in Lee County, and we have a question here.
Okay.
Yes, my name is Jim Dunn. I'm up here at Sauk Valley Community College in Lee County. I had two questions for Dr. Redfield.
Sure.
Okay.
First one, Doctor, do you have any time frame on the appeal process regarding the lawsuits against the redistricting maps that were passed by the legislature and signed by the governor?
The courts have historically been very cognizant of electoral calendars. I mean, they will not. We have had delays in terms of when people, start in terms of filing petitions. But I would be very surprised if this is not resolved fairly quickly, because those, that's coming up, and so when people are going to be circulating petitions, and we have bumped the electoral calendar back. I mean, the courts have enjoined the state board from and the election authorities from doing that, but my assumption is that it's not going to be it'll probably be resolved fairly quickly. That's assuming the Democrats have done what they tried to do, which was to draw maps that would, the first criteria was the political advantage. The second criteria was to limit your legal exposure, and we'll see how good their attorneys were in terms of that issue. Yeah, it could get thrown open, and then everything gets pushed back, but I'm not anticipating that.
Okay, thank you. And the second question?
Carroll
I have
County.
one more question, please.
Sure.
Carroll County. Are you receiving my question? Carroll County.
Just a moment.
Carroll County, we have not received a typed question. Let's take the second question from Lee County, and then Carol will give you guys a turn next, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, this is Jim Dunn in Lee County again.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Redfield, you spoke about several times about the map the maps and the district lines being obviously drawn in favor of Democratic candidates. Do you have, and are the statistics public for this, that you can say with certainty that there's a 55% edge or a 60% edge or a 52% edge for one party over the other? Or
you can
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, and both the websites, the official websites, will have voting age, statistics and breakouts. And there are figures within the lawsuit in terms of your alleging advantage. The best analysis generally tends to be private, although this time around both Politico and I'm trying to think of the other national website. What you do to kind of figure this out is you construct a model that says, okay, here let's look at the precinct level. Let's look at all those precincts. How did they vote for president the last two times around? How did they vote for governor? How did they vote for Secretary of State? And then you weight those, and everybody has their own little formula about how to go about this. And the kind of professional opinion in terms of neutral observers is that all things being equal, that it's worth 2 or 3 seats to the Democrats on the congressional map, 2 to 4, and that it is as 3 or 4 Senate seats, 2 or 3 Senate seats and 4 or 5 House seats. That's all things being equal. And again, that's why we have elections. So on paper, you can look at, there are some public analysis that try to take the voting histories at the precinct level and aggregate them for the new districts and say that, yes, the district that Springfield's in, which I think is the 17th, is a more Democratic district than what Congressman Durbin got elected from, and that Shimkus beat Hoffman in. That just gets you in the door. You tell me what the economy's doing and who the candidates are, and that's probably more important than the boundaries. But yeah, I think you can run some numbers that will. People have run numbers that I think clearly show that the Democrats drew a very partisan map.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question?
Well, we would like to, our time, can you hold your question if we have enough time? I'd like to shift over to the other county that had a question, and then we can come back to you if we have enough time, okay?
That would be fine, certainly.
All right,
yes.
Thank you. Did we get the other question?
For Carroll County?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. My question is, has there been any more talk about the doing away of the Electoral College and the voting system?
It is something that comes up every time we have a close election or we get a result like in 2000, and then everybody gets excited about it, and then the urgency kind of goes away. It's a phenomena that's quite similar to the way we do redistricting, have done redistricting in the past in Illinois, where we draw a name out of a hat, and we have a big flurry of activity saying, this is just crazy, we have to have a better process, and then you kind of have to sustain that over a decade. If you don't get it right away, then every day that passes, it becomes harder and harder for people to think about a constitutional amendment and why that's important, and so it's been one of those things that the immediacy of the moment, besides there are strong, there are obviously arguments both sides of that, but just from a political standpoint, it's very hard to sustain the momentum that would be required for constitutional amendment at either the federal or the state level if you're going to fix Illinois' redistricting. So, yeah, I mean, it's, academics care about it a lot. When we have a close election, everybody cares about it, but then it seems to go away, as fade as if we get away from the election.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. We do still have a few more minutes. Sir, you had a third question?
Yes.
Okay.
I was just going to ask Dr. Redfield. You talked about the political scientists studying the voting trends, registrations, and whatnot to try to divine how one district favors one party over the other. But actually, that information does exist, right, within the files of the people who actually drew the map. Somewhere or another, they have that knowledge. Could that be accessed through a public records requests or a Freedom of Information Act request?
There are a couple of answers there. Yeah, I mean, the best data has always been private. We are moving out of an era where that's the case because of the fact that modern databases and IT technology allow you to get at that data, and so I'm thinking of like I say, there were a couple of kind of instant analysis. One of them was in Politico, where they were essentially dealing with the same precinct data that the legislative, the four legislative caucuses were dealing with, because it's a matter of coding and then drawing models. Unfortunately, to the question of getting access to this, the General Assembly has exempted itself from Freedom of Information requests, and so these are they are not something that you're going to be able to get in terms of FOIA. I'm quite serious though that the fact that this data is people are now have this data and are able to manipulate it, means that it's going to become much more democratic. There's no reason the legislature couldn't put all of this online and invite people to draw their own maps. And Ohio has a competition. They don't always pay attention to it, but they put the data out there and say draw some districts, and they give you political information as well as the demographic information. So I don't know that. Yeah, I doubt that you're going to get access to the models that the legislative caucuses used to draw these maps or the alternatives. But I think the good news is that their monopoly on this data is going to become less and less of an issue as time goes forward. We're going to get a lot more transparency, not because they want it, but because the technology exists to allow everybody to build their own databases and construct their own models.
Great. Great question. Very interesting. So with that, sorry, we're going to have to end the conversation. Dr. Redford, thank you so much for providing the information to us. Everyone on your handouts, you do have contact information for Dr. Redfield. If you would like more information about the census, you can contact me, but you can also contact your local extension educator who specializes in community and economic development. Once again, thank you, Dr. Redfield, I'm sorry. And
No.
Amanda, I'm just going to turn it over to you.
As Rhonda said, thank you both. Today I think we had a great program, and thank you for the audience participation. Just remind everyone to please submit your sign-in sheet and evaluation form to Annette Cole. Also, for those who may be new and are interested in registering in the Certified County Officials Program, please submit that form along with your evaluation and registration form so you could receive credit for today's classes. And I hope that many of you will be able to join us in November, where we will be having a legislative update. And once again, thank you very much. And for follow-up, there's contact information for both Rhonda and Dr. Redfield provided in the introduction slide. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Good evening.
Thank you.